Hello, Facebook family and friends. How are you today? Today, we are going to talk about something that is very dear to me. We've been talking about this a lot, and I'm going to show you today how to identify an investment grade property by using data and the due diligence that we take place in finding an investment grade property. I would also share how do I go about setting up strategies? How do I use my own few method to articulate a bespoke strategy that fits in individual client? I always tend to say this to everyone that a property strategy is like your fingerprint. It has to be tailor made for your own self. Before we go into the topic, and this is a heavy topic, so go out there, grab a drink or a coffee. I have my own tea here with me, if you can see. Do that. Be comfortable before we kick off. I would like to maybe spend a few minutes introducing myself, and let me share the pack with you that we are going to talk about today. Um, so again, we're talking about the secrets of finding an investment grade property. So what does this webinar is going to talk about? The key things is how to find the properties, how do we go about buying them, where to buy these properties, where to find these properties, how does the suburb selection works, what data points are we looking at, how do we go about finding the right property for the right portfolio, and what are the key things that you need to look at when you're doing a due diligence for your investment property. Okay, now let me take a few seconds introducing myself again. I am, for those who don't know me, this is Moss from Investor Partner Group. I help create sustainable property portfolios without impacting your lifestyle. That is my sole motto of my own life as well, and I help try achieving that for other people as well. Um, how do I do this? I do this while educating people on how to identify growth suburbs, how to do developments, how to form investment strategies, um, and while doing all of this, how do we make sure that we are improving our lifestyle? So we are not just paper rich, but we are actually cash rich. So we are property advisors, we are buyers agents, we are property developers, we are tax and SMSF advisors. We do a lot of feasibilities and due diligence across various different networks. We collect a lot of data across 15,000 suburbs all across Australia. And identifying a handful of suburbs out of each state, it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of time. Me, myself, I've been investing well over 12 years now. Between me and my partners, we have well over 20 years of industry experience. I've done a lot of development projects and assisted in hundreds of property acquisitions all across Australia. Do visit our website. It is helpmeby.com.au. Visit our Facebook community called Property Investment Australia, where I do tend to talk, or we then tend to talk and share tips and tricks of, how do people be successful and create wealth through property investments. It is a very, do-it-yourself sort of strategy when you come towards the group. And we share a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, a lot of client success stories on our group for people to, ascertain and see as to how, people are doing what they're doing and how they're achieving what they're achieving, when it comes to property investing. Um, Taking next steps. So, what is an investment grade property? And I basically identified that as as an infinity trio. So, an investment grade property. Okay, let's take a step back and understand, the dynamics of investment market or complete property investment market first per se. If you look at it right now, there are about 115,000 houses listed for sale all across Australia. Okay, let me repeat myself again. So let's try to understand an investment grade property and what is an investment grade property. So right now there are over 115,000 houses listed for sale all across Australia. Now, less than 5% of those would be classified as a true investment grade property, which is circa about 5,700 properties. Okay. Now, out of those 5,700 properties listed, there would only be like 10% which would have some sort of development potential in them. That means that there would be only 570 properties with development potential across all of Australia at any given point in time. Now, I'm generalizing this across the state, but if you go state by state, roughly there are about 90 properties at any given point in time that has some sort of development potential or value add in them that you can achieve or acquire. Now, not all of the investment grade properties would be in the growth suburbs. Okay, so time in the property or time in the property market or timing the property market, it's quite important as well. And I've talked a lot about it. So not all of these investment grade properties would be in the growth suburb, which means by the time we focus on the suburb that we are looking to buy property in, you are usually looking at a handful of properties in any given suburb at any given time that would tick all these boxes for you, and that makes the life, I would say, easier or harder at the same time, because your approach is very focused. You're looking at a particular set of instructions for buying the right property. Now, defining an investment grade property. An investment grade property should always have three things in them. Okay. And that's why I define it as an infinity trio. What are those three things? So the trio or the three things are these. Okay. The property that you are going to acquire needs to always be in a growth suburb. Now, there is a difference between a growth corridor and a growth suburb, and a lot of people tend to get misleaded by growth corridors versus growth suburbs. Growth corridors are areas where there is a lot of developable land available, and there is intention, or the government intention, or the council intention, or the state government's intention to accommodate higher population in there, which means that there is significant amount of supply coming through in those growth corridors to accommodate those population increases. A growth suburb, on a flip side, is a complete opposite of that. A growth suburb is where demand is significantly higher and the supply is almost none, or very, very low. And there is no incoming supply of land or similar properties available. A savvy investor should always stay away from growth corridors, because growth corridors is usually a lifestyle choice. It's not for an investor to catch short-term growth. Okay. And people who disagree, or people who have more questions or want to understand a bit more about these difference, I'm happy to do a separate session or have a bit of chat about some of these things as well. So a savvy investor should always invest in a growth suburb. A growth suburb is defined as a suburb where a demand to come and buy in that suburb is significantly higher than the incoming supply or the supply available at that time for properties. That's how we define growth suburb. Um, the second thing is about the property. So the property that you're going to add to your portfolio. Now, people tend to talk about cash flow positive, and it says here positive cash flow as well. But it's not so much about the positive cash flow or the negative cash flow. The property added to your portfolio should not impact your lifestyle as a person. We are calling it positive cash flow because general masses, when they are starting from a foundational perspective, it's quite key that your portfolio matures and adds value and creates that cash flow for you, so that you may add a negatively geared property in your portfolio. For example, something in Melbourne, which may have a higher development potential to catch significant long-term growth, and potential to create higher yield through roaming houses, grannies or extensions or changing the configurations. But the idea is this, that the overall portfolio, any property that you add to your overall portfolio, your portfolio should be set up in such a way that the properties complement each other, which means that you should not be sacrificing your lifestyle to hold any of these properties. In fact, investment property portfolio should improve your lifestyle in the short term and the medium term, which means that you should not be paper rich, but actually cash rich. Okay, so remember, these banks look at cash flow; they don't care about cash, and so should you. You should be looking at cash flow as much as you're looking about cash or paper cash as well, or equity or growth. Okay, so both are very, very important. The third and the final thing when you talk about an investment grade property, which majority of the times people tend to discount, is that these properties need to have some sort of land component or development potential in them. For this to be identified, you need to understand the residential code quite well, without which it is almost impossible to achieve it. A development potential property potentially means that the property that you're acquiring in the future can be subdivided into one into three, one into two, can be split, create a battlex, a house at the back, a granny at the back, configuration change from 3 bedroom, 1 bathroom to 4 bedroom, 2 bathroom, renovation. So there should be some sort of value add potential in the property. And this is what's going to help you basically create a buffer for yourself in times where the market is flat. This gives you a remediation and as an exit strategy, which is very, very important. And acquisition strategy is as important as a remediation strategy. Remediation strategy is quite the key, and majority of the times people don't think about what my exit strategy is for this property. And these development potential property or these investment properties have a clear exit strategy for you. How do you make sure that you exit out of this property, when the time comes? Okay. uh, let's go to the next slide. Now, I will be taking questions, and I'll be taking questions at the very end. So bear with me. And if you have any questions, please write them down, or follow it in the chat. I'll take these questions as we go along. But, we'll go through some pack and we'll take a bit of break and then come back to it. Okay. Now, let's talk about few method. Now, the few method is all about creating sustainable property portfolio. Now, this is my own method, and it is created in such a way that it caters for uh, any person who is going to acquire investment property. It does not really matter where you are in your life cycle or property life cycle. The method is created in such a way that it helps you achieve sustainable property portfolio or sustainable property growth or sustainable growth in the future as well. Now, what does FEW stands for? So FEW stands for, with F is foundational properties. F is also for first-time buyers or first-time investors. E stands for expedition properties, which are for experienced investors. And W stands for worthy properties, which is for high net worth investors. Now, foundational properties are a crux of this sustainable portfolio. Okay, these properties are low risk, high growth, and strong yield properties. Okay, these are the properties that range between, say, $300,000 to $600,000 properties, and you can acquire these from a deposit as low of a deposit as $50,000 or more. Okay, uh, it's very, very important that when you are catching or adding foundation properties to your portfolio, that you are aiming for growth suburbs and high growth and strong yield positions, so you're not sacrificing your yield in order to build your portfolio, because the foundation of anything needs to be really, really strong. If you don't have a good foundation set up and if you start building on it, it becomes a house of cards and everything falls off. So what I basically mean about this is, when the interest rate starts rising, or if the interest rate starts rising, or if the market changes dynamically on a macro level, your portfolio should be able to absorb any shocks. Whether it be 1-2% interest rate rise, whether it's COVID 2.0, whether it's GFC. There are property cycles, and they always happen. I was talking to a client just this morning, and the client basically said, well, we haven't seen property cycle, we have only seen the boom, which is not true. Because if you look at the property cycles over the last sort of 7 to 10 years, what has happened is that 7-year property cycle is now almost turned and shrunk and turned into a 3.5 year property cycle. So those cycles are still there. It's just a matter of when the boom happens and when the bust happens, and it's important to identify and know, so that you are ready to either catch on the opportunities, or be ready for absorbing any shocks. Both are as important. Expedition properties. So expedition properties, they are the next in line. They still offer decent growth and yield, but these properties is where the returns are built into them. Okay. Expedition properties can also be great foundational properties if they come with a decent yield. They start somewhere between 500,000 and grow from there. You can add expedition properties to that extent that they might be neutrally geared or even negatively geared properties, because you are thinking about actively doing small scale developments, splitters. All of this becomes part of this strategy. for when you're building up the strategy. Now, it is for slightly mature investors, and that's why we call it for experienced investors. It's not for new investors. New investors should always ensure that the foundational properties are there. When an investor comes to us and talks about some of these, strategic directions, we always look at how their property portfolio is set up, and do they have enough foundational properties in place so that the property portfolio can grow and mature faster. Okay. Now, the last one are the worthy properties, and these are the type of properties that add significant passive income to your portfolios. These would be, complex property structures with high capital requirements, like rooming houses in the IS, full scale developments, micro developments, micro housings. A lot of the times, and this is an interesting comment, a lot of the times people would try to enter their property life cycle or property investment journey by entering through the route of worthy properties, because you see a lot of people talking about NDIS properties and rooming houses and full scale developments. Well, the biggest setback of worthy properties is that it offers you magnificent yield, and sometimes return, but it never offers growth to you. Okay, so as part of your investment journey, growth is quite the key, especially for the first 2 to 4 years. And if you're not catching enough growth, short term growth and long term growth, you would always be scumming your property portfolio, or you would always be shrinking your property portfolio, not giving us enough oxygen to grow at that its own pace. Okay. Now, in order to create more borrowing, you may add one of these borrowing, or worthy properties in your portfolio to grow your portfolio further. But they are added at the, further in the later stage of your journey, okay, because of the non-existence of the capital growth. If the investor suffers to catch any growth in the start of the property journey, it just defies the purpose of any of this. You shouldn't do property developments or start from property developments, because you're exposing or taking too much risks at the start of the journey. You should make sure that your property portfolio is locked in and fixed, so you're getting some income, you have some assets built up, you have the foundations right before you start building up and going towards small scale development. While we're talking about the strategy, let's take a few minutes to understand, how do we go about setting these strategies for some of the people. Okay, this is a patented software that we use. Majority of our clients are here where we discuss their strategy in great length. We have this is assumptions driven. This talks about the 10-year and the 30-year horizons, about different clients. It talks about how you are doing around your lifestyle, your expenses, your savings. I'll quickly show you as to what does it look like. So when you're looking at some of these scenarios, you're looking at basically, when are you adding properties in your portfolio, when are you taking holidays, when are you adding a commercial property to your portfolio. So it goes and shows what your safety net is. I'm going to take you back and show you some of the graphs that we look at when we are looking at some of these uh, uh, property acquisitions, or the core strategies. It talks about what the market value of your portfolio is going to look like over a sort of 30-year horizon. What sort of savings that would you accumulate, what sort of equity that you would achieve. So it's quite important, it's quite the key. How does your offset account works, and when do you pay off your loan. I'm going to go back and show you another graph that is quite key and quite important in relation to understanding some of these things. So, if you want to retire in, say, 2020, in 2036, what is the passive income target that you're trying to achieve? When are you going to add the properties? When is the rollover going to happen? Because you always tend to keep your portfolio in investment only portfolio. So when does the rollover happens between interest only and profit and principal and interest? And when do you hit your retirement age? And how do you create that passive income for yourself as quick as possible? One more thing that I wanted to quickly share is, how does your borrowing capacity looks like? Okay, so while you're adding, various different properties, your borrowing capacity, your debt goes up and it goes down when you're adding. So these are every time that the debt is going up, you're adding new properties in your portfolio. So you can see that as your borrowing capacity goes up, you're adding various different properties in your portfolio and your profile. Um, What's also important is a lot of this is driven by algorithm to understand how the portfolio has been set up for you. It also takes into account, when are you going to, buy a motor vehicle, go on a holiday, and take all of these things into account as well. So it is quite detailed in nature, and it takes about 30 years of data to understand how your strategy is going to play out and where would you be in various different scenarios. I'm going to take a pause here and take some questions if you have any. Um, the two of the other charts that you want to always also look at is, the sensitivity analysis of, when the interest rate starts rising. How does your repayments gets impacted when they rise higher, when they go lower? So this is quite the key as well in its own. And also the rental yields. How do the rental yields change over a period of time? Okay. So I'm going to take a pause here. We are going to jump on to the next slide, and we are going to basically talk about suburb and property selections. Now, suburb and property selection. So how do I go about doing that? Okay. As we discussed before, any property that you buy should always be in a growth suburb. Okay. So, what are the first identifications of a growth suburb? Now, I'm going to give you a few minutes to have a bit of think about, or have a bit of a brainstorm going as to what is the a definition of a growth suburb. What is the basic identification of a growth suburb? Okay. I'm looking at some of the comments coming through, but okay, so I'm going to give the answer away. So the first identification of a growth suburb is that a suburb where the number of listings are significantly lower than the number of sales, or the number of sales are significantly higher than the number of listings, and the sales price haven't grown in the area by more than 15% over the last 36 months. Okay, this is the most basic indicator of identifying a growth suburb. Okay, so people tend to look at it at a few different things. They look at number of sales, how fast the sales are happening, number of listings, which is how many listings are coming through, or stock on market, how much stock on market there is. And we'll talk and go into a lot more detail, but this is the bare minimum, or the crux of identifying growth suburb, the bare minimum of your acquisitions. Okay, now, narrowing down the suburb, there is 5 stages to property selection. Okay, and it does not start from identifying the suburb. It starts from actually narrowing the suburb down. So you would have a small list of suburbs, and then looking at that narrowed suburb list, you would understand the demand side of things, and you would understand the supply side of things. And once you've understood that, then only the property selection comes in place, and that property selection would be defined by whether you want to buy and hold, or whether you want to buy or and hold and develop, and that's where you build on your portfolio with. Okay, but suburb narrowing is where the magic starts. Okay, now, suburb narrowing is all about your own choices. Okay, and people say and ask me this question all the time. Okay, tell me which suburb to buy, tell me which suburb to buy. Well, that's not the question that you should be asking yourself. The questions or the choices that you should be asking yourself is this. Okay, what is the budget that you have for finding the properties, or what is the budget that you're working with? So that comes back to the strategy. Okay, how many properties are you adding over the life of, say, 5 years, 10 years time frame, and what budget are you working with right now to add the property? Okay, once you have identified the budget, you have a list of suburbs and a target state, for example, that you're working with. Okay. Once you have that list of suburbs, what you are going to identify is shrink that list down by the vacancy rates that you're trying to achieve in that suburb. Okay. Now, the lower the vacancy rates are better. Now, I'm going to throw a lot of jargons here, but we will come back and talk about all of these indicators, whether it be the supply and the demand side indicators. Uh, but the ideal vacancy rates for those suburbs, that's quite the key. The rental yield that you are aiming to achieve based on your strategy, and also understanding what the demand to supply ratio is. So how big is the demand? How small is the supply? And what supply demand ratio are you trying to achieve? Okay. Now, narrowing these indicators down, you would get a list of probably about 10 to 15 suburbs, sometimes even 5 suburbs, based on how strict you are in your suburb narrowing. Once um, From a suburb narrowing perspective, you can work with the whole state, okay, at a particular price point, okay. If you get a massive list anytime anymore, what you have to do is you have to filter it further down to get better suburb narrowing to indicate more. So once the suburb is narrowed, we look at demand and supply indicators to identify which suburb has the highest demand and the lowest supply. Okay. Now each indicator has a range that you are aiming to hit. Okay, and when you are hitting that range, it has to be a perfect recipe. It's like a fruit ready to ripe. Yeah, you take it out too early and it's raw, and you wait it way too long, and you have to throw it out anyway. So it's a perfect recipe of picking the suburb at the right time. Timing is quite the key, because it's not just about finding the right suburb that is going to grow in the future, but it's also important how quick does the growth comes to that area. And I'll give you a few examples about this, because you hear people talking about it's all about time in the property market and not timing the property market. And I'll call BS on some of these things, because the time in the property market and timing the property market is both quite the key and very, very important, because you could identify a suburb and sit in that suburb for 10 years and see no growth, and someone else could buy in that same suburb 6 7 8 years later, and catch exactly the same growth as you, because you've both bought it at the same suburb at a different price point, at the same price but at different times, and you've both caught the same cash return. But the internal rate of return or the quicker return is by the person who's bought in that suburb much later than you. So I'll give you a few examples. For example, and you'll hear me talking about some of these suburbs quite often in majority of my lives. You look at Frankston in Victoria in 2010, or Marsden Park in New South Wales in 2010. You would see that there was literally no growth till 2018. So if you would have picked that suburb in 2010, you would have sat on that suburb till 2018 and would have seen nothing, like literally zero growth. But if you'd have picked that suburb in 2018, you would have seen that you would have caught significant amount of growth between 18 and 21. Now, people who have bought there in 2010 would see exactly the same growth between 18 and 21, and people who have bought it in 17 18 would exactly catch the same amount of growth. Who do you think are better? You're better off being as close to the growth curve as possible. Now, okay, so coming back to narrowed suburbs down. So once you've narrowed the suburb list down to say one or two suburbs, that's where the real fun starts. Okay, now what you are doing is you are looking at property selections, you're looking at various data points, you're looking at due diligence to ensure that the properties that you're looking at is the right property. So now let's take a step back, and we've been going through a lot of these jargons. But what I want to do today is I want to present the list of 30 indicators in the due diligence points that everyone talks about, but no one explains what these are and how should these be interpreted. Now, the first one is median house price. So, median house price is average of the total house prices sold in an area over a month. If you're looking on a monthly median house prices, that's what median house price is. What is vacancy rates? Vacancy rates means how long does a rented property remains vacant during the year. For example, 4% vacancy rate means that there are 4 properties that are vacant out of 100 properties on rent in a month, or a rolling 12 months average. People aim for less than 5% vacancy rates. I still feel that 5% is quite high, considering there are 5 vacant properties present out every 100 properties on rent. Higher vacancy rate means that the house remains empty longer, which means less rental demand, which means higher out of pocket. So it indicates that there is less demand for rental properties. So it's very important that you aim for low vacancy rates rather than high vacancy rates. Okay. Now, again, to my earlier point, what is the best percentage? Okay. Is it 2%? Is it 3%? Is it 4%? Is it 5%? That perfect recipe is something that you have to work for every client, for every property, for every suburb. Okay. It's very, very important. It's very, very key. Okay, so rental yield. What is rental yield? You'll hear people talk about rental yield all the time. Well, rental yield basically means that you're looking at the total rental income for full year over the purchase price of the property. Okay, now historical trends indicate that higher rental yields are usually followed by higher growth, bringing the average down to a state average of, say, 3 to 4%. Okay, so one indicator there, which is quite important and quite the key, is that when you're looking at rental yields of 5, 6, 7% in metro areas, definitely the investors are going to come rushing in those suburbs as they find out about these suburbs and bring the rental yield down by offering better prices for the property. Now, you would hear people talk about these demand supply ratios or DSR ratios all the time. Now, let me explain to you what these demand supply ratios are. Okay, so demand supply ratio indicates how strong is a demand in a particular suburb compared to a supply. Now, most people use these to understand, a demand in a particular area, and they think that if a demand supply ratio is high, you should buy in that area. um, but that's not really the right sort of way, because the demand in the in that scenario is a combination of indicators, and supply includes a combination of supply indicators. What it doesn't do, it doesn't look at incoming developable land. It does not look at supply created via subdivisions. It is a point in time as to it is a point in time indicator which shows that the demand is significantly higher than supply, which can basically mean that the demand is so higher than supply that you're buying it at the peak. That's all it means. It does not indicate what a future demand and supply means, because that's where the growth is related to. Yeah, a lot of people also think that previous growth is an indication of future growth, or past growth is an indication of future growth. That's again not true. Past great growth in no way or shape indicator of a future growth or future trend. Each growth cycle is completely different and not interconnected to what has happened in the last property cycle. I've seen property cycles where properties have tanked in a particular growth cycle and then come back up in another growth cycle. So be very, very careful when people are quoting demand supply ratios to you, because demand supply ratios only indicates in that snapshot point in time that the demand is significantly higher than supply. Now, how do you read a demand supply ratio? Now, for example, if a demand and supply ratio is say 50%, that means one person is looking for the property and one person is selling the property. Basically, it's 50%, so demand equals supply. If one person buying and four people are selling, that means that the ratio is only 20%. Okay. On the flip side, if there is one person selling and then there is four people buying, then the demand to supply ratio is about 80%. Okay. Those were some of the high level indicators. Now we are going to take a bit of a deeper dive into some of the demand side indicators and some of the supply side indicators. Okay. So bear with me again. If you want to take a quick break, if you want to go out, grab a coffee, grab a tea, we'll take, 5 minutes here and then come back and rejoin you again. Okay. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining me again. For those who are joining me just now, again, this is Moss from Investor Partner Group. Okay, so we were talking about the suburb selection. So demand, supply, and the qualitative indicators. So what are the demand indicators? Okay, and I'll go one by one and I'll explain each one of them to you slowly and gradually. Okay, so you would hear people talk about DOM, or days on market. Days on market basically means how long has the property been listed for sale on website. Days on market needs to be looked at over trends of 36 months or 3 years. It's in a single point in time, it means nothing. People say days on market, 50 days, 40 days, 30 days means nothing. It means zero. It has to have a trend, and it has to have a percentage change from a point in time, whether it be 12 months ago, 24 months ago, 36 months ago. Okay. When does this come? Now, majority of these indicators, when you're looking at them, they have to be looked as a percentage change or a trend. It can't be looked at a point in time, and that's quite the key. And that's why you would have to have rich data to support some of these things. We collect data over 10 years, so you have to have really rich data to make these honest guidance and honest opinions. Okay. Now, vendor's discount. So, what is vendor's discount? It is the difference between asking price of the property sold in a suburb and the actual sold price. In a seller's market, you would see that vendor's discount is negative, which means that the market is in the highs. A positive vendor's discount means that the property in the area are selling below the asking price. A very high positive is not a good sign. So, you need to again look at these over 36 months. Online search interest. So again, OSIs, you would hear people talk about it. OSI is a ratio of the number of people searching online, whether it be on realestate.com, domain.com, for a property in a specific location, over the number of properties available for sale in that specific location. Okay. Again, it needs to be looked at over 36 months. Okay. It can be as low as, two people looking for properties, or it could be as high as, 3,000 people, searching for properties against the number of properties available for sale. Okay. Auction. Now, again, what is the perfect number when it comes to OSI? That recipe is quite the key. Whether is it 200, is it 300, is it 500, is it 1,000, is it 2,000? What is the perfect sort of recipe? You pick a higher number, and you are basically indicating you're buying it in a hot market. You pick a really low number, and you're basically buying in an area which is not really a growth suburb. Auction clearance rate. So auction clearance rates, majority of people would know, it's a percentage of properties that sell via auction compared to the total number of properties that go on auction each week. You would hear media talk about auction clearance rates, vacancy rates, and yields majority of the time. No one talks about anything else. A higher auction clearance rate means higher demand. Okay, but it's not as simple as that. I think auction clearance rate is the least of the indicators which impacts the demands. So that's just what my take on it is. People overrate ACR quite a bit. ACR has the least correlation when it comes to identifying the demand in the particular area. Renters proportion. Numbers of renters in the suburb over total suburb population. That's how the renters proportion is coming into place. That's how it's calculated. Renters proportion is a higher renters proportion is never a good thing, which means that the suburb is controlled by investors, which means the true growth is unlikely to happen if a suburb has a higher renter population. Notice that homeowners drive the price growth. It's not so much the investors. The genuine growth is driven by homeowners. Yes, investors, drive the property cycle, but in a downturning market, it's the homeowners who would drive the market because they try tightly control the stock. So, be very, very careful and sensitive entering into areas where the renters proportion is quite significantly high. You could see renters proportion quite significantly high in areas like Ipswich, in areas like Moreton Council, and they don't flip, they don't change quite often. It's not that, you have 40% renters proportion, it changes to, 20%, or you have 50% renters proportion, it changes to 15%. It takes months and months for that proportion to change. Okay, next one. So let's look at some of the supply side of indicators now. So some of the supply side indicators, the first one is the stock on market. So the stock on market basically means that the number of properties listed on the market in that particular suburb divided by total properties of number of properties in that suburb. So it basically identifies how much stock is available on market at any given point in time. The lower is always better, but again, it's always important to look at the trends. You look at 36 months. You can't look at just a point in time. People tend to look at 2%, 3% rate. I personally feel that it's very high. 2%, 3% stock on market is quite significantly higher, and it defines that there is a lot of stock available in an area. Okay. Median growth over 26 to 36 months. It's a percentage change in prices for a particular type of houses over 24 to 36 months. Now, This is quite the key. Yeah. So when you're looking at median growth over 26 to 36 months, uh, you need to compare apple to apples. Okay. So people look at this measure and look at it in a very, very generalized fashion. Okay. Now, when you're looking, for example, what is the median house price in a particular suburb? A three-bedroom brand new house is still classified as a house on a 200 square meter land, and an old three-bedroom house in 1,000 square meter. They are both classified as houses, but they are both priced thousand times difference from each other. Okay, so it's important when you're looking at median prices for a particular suburb, you look at particular cohorts as well. Okay, understand what the price per square meter is of each of those properties, whether you're buying a brand new stock, a retail stock, a three-bedroom, one bathroom, four-bedroom, one bathroom. Each one of them have different medians. We tend to divide our house cohorts by land sizes, bedroom frontages, position of the land, bathroom. So it's important to look at the right medians as well. Don't look at generalized medians. Yeah, people just distract and put you in different directions by quoting general suburb medians to you. Okay, it might be a possibility that there is significant growth that has already happened in your cohort, and there is a more than likely chance that you would not see much growth in the future. But or on the flip side, there is a significant chance that there is more growth that is going to come to your cohort, but the median price is not reflecting it because there is too much supply that is in there out in the market, by say small houses of 200 squares, which means that you're going to miss out on some of the growth that happens in chunks. Okay. Median rental over 24 months. Again, finding the right median is the key. It is the median for the cohort. It's the right data set that you should be looking at for the median rental. An increase, I've said this before, an increase in the rental medians are a sign of increased, it's a sign of increased demand, and it's quite an important sort of integer to look at, or indicator to look at. Another one which is quite important to look at is developable land supply. So amount of developable land available in the area divided by total size of the suburb. This is driven by zones, but it is also dependent on how much land supply can be converted from a passive to active supply. That's the key. There is a lot of supply, but can it be converted from passive to active? Is that land available to develop? Is it veg zone? Is it farmland? Is it flat and ready to be developed in the future? Or is it ready to be rezoned? Knowing all of that information is quite the key as well. Planning and building permit approvals. Now this relates to how many more houses, townhouses, or units are coming in the area. A higher development approvals of a complementary stock uh, is never a good sign. It's actually a bad sign. Okay, a higher approvals for a stock which is not the same stock is actually a good sign. Okay, so understand this. I'm going to repeat myself again. So higher development approvals of a stock which is very similar is a bad sign. A higher approvals or development approvals of a stock which is completely different cohort, it's a complementary stock. For example, you're going to buy a house, but there's higher development approvals for units or townhouses. That's a good sign. That's not a bad sign. Okay, so it's very, very important that when you're looking at building approvals, the type of product that you're looking for is quite the key, and you're looking at total building approvals over the type of the product that you are going to buy. Okay, people get confused here a lot. People think that, oh, if there is a lot of developments happening in the area, then their prices are going to go down. No, well, history says it, data says it, trends say it all the time that if you are going to buy, for example, if I have a price position in a suburb, say 1,000 square meter corner block or something like that, and there is a lot of units that are being built, my land price would keep going up. It's not going to go down with more units coming in the area. So that's quite the key. That's very, very important. Okay, now we are going to talk about the quantitative due diligence of the suburb, the qualitative due diligence of the suburb. I'm going to take a pause here. Give me 2 ticks, and then we'll start this again. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We are going to talk about the qualitative due diligence for the suburbs. It's quite important and it's quite the key. So, understanding the locations from school, what are the school rankings, what public transport system there is, how far it is from CBD, shopping center, beach, access to freeway. You also need to look at population change, income level change, mortgage affordability, rental affordability, job and employment rates, and neighborhood character. um, some of the things that people tend to miss out on are council activities, state activities in those suburbs, housing commissions, which side of the suburb is good or bad. Are there any ghetto sides, versus nicer pockets in a particular suburb? All of these things, although they are qualitative functions, but you have quantitative data attached to it. So that can be deciphered and converted to information and logic, when we are making some of these decisions. Okay. So it's quite the key, quite the important. It's an interesting list. It's a very, very important list. Don't discount the importance of rental affordability, mortgage affordability, income level changes, population changes, job and employment rates, together with all of everything that else that you're looking at. Now we are going to basically look at the property selection. Okay, so now this is the final sort of get go of property selection. Now this is where majority of the fun begins. Yeah, now people think that suburb selection is great and suburb selection takes a bit of time. Of course it is an intense exercise to identify the right pocket, but once you've identified the pocket, the property selection and the due diligence is the fun part. You get this wrong and all the effort on the suburb selection goes to complete waste. Okay, I have a client who, in their previous life, has have bought in the right suburb, but possibly the worst possible property. And apologies if you're listening to me, guys, but it's so sad. Yeah, they saw two property cycles and saw zero growth, like zilch, none growth, and it's sad. And we are helping them remediate the portfolio, and she has caught 100K in growth in less than a month for a new property that we've acquired. It's not even settled, but that's the importance of finding the right property. If you are not doing the due diligence properly, even though if you're right in the right suburb and that suburb has grown by 30%, your property would not see the growth. Okay, it's as simple as that. It's unfortunate, but that's the key sort of message out of all of this. Okay, anyways, so the fun part begins when it comes to property selection. And for people who has worked with me, who know me, I am very, very picky and very choosy. It's like picking the life partner, the right life partner for yourself. Yeah, so some of the things that matters to me most. Okay, starting from zones. Okay, so the first thing that I would always look for the property is what zones are you looking at. For example, if you are Melburnian, needing to understand what a GRZ1 versus NRZ1 versus RGZ1 is quite the key. It's quite important because prices are dictated by zones, whether you believe it or not. Okay, Adelaide is the same. If you are an Adelaide cider, you would know what the hillsides are. You would know what the general residentials is or the high densities are. If you're Sydney or Brisbane, you would understand the difference between R1, R2, and R3. It's very, very important to understand the zones and what the minimum lot sizes are attached to each it, and the positions, and how does it work, and what are the offsets and setbacks. And we'll talk about some of these things as well. But zone is the key, and that drives and dictates the price regardless of whatever everyone says. If you are buying the right property in the wrong zone, you can't do pretty much anything. Okay, the next in conversation is overlays. Okay, now there is various different kinds of overlays. Okay, there is heritage, flood zone, bushfire zone, airport overlays, significant landscape overlays, tree overlays, vegetation protection overlays, infrastructure overlays. So it's important that you have to bypass pretty much all of them. Okay, cyclone overlays, and there's heaps of them. Yeah, you need to know which ones are the good ones and the bad ones, and which ones you can navigate through. Okay, I'll give you a very quick example. People tend to stay away from heritage overlays, but not all heritage overlays are bad. Okay, there are two types of heritage overlays. One where you can't make any changes to the house, you can't even change the facade or the brick facing. But there is another one where a heritage overlay is fine. All you need to do is a cultural heritage management plan, and you can do whatever you want with the place. Okay, so it's very important to know your overlays, understand what you can do and how you can play with these, and what do they mean. Okay, what are the impacts of these overlays? Okay, for example, airport overlays are quite the key, but there are ways to navigate through them as well. I just locked in a property for a client today where we bought the property about $60,000 discounted from the market price, or probably like maybe almost $100,000 discounted from the market price. But we got it because there was an airport overlay and people thought it's bad. But there are certain things that ticks the boxes, and you could do a lot more with that property, and it's still full scale development potential property. But because people don't realize this, they discount it, and the agents do that as well. Don't assume that the agents know everything. Agents know nothing. You need to be making sure that you know everything. Okay. Easements. Now then, there are easements, and everyone's are scared of easements. And easements. What is an easement? Let's take a few minutes to understand that. Easements are basically a right for someone else, whether it be council or your neighbors, a right to do something with the property that is there. Okay, easements are tricky, but most of the times they're harmless. But you have to be very, very careful with how the easements are tracking. Okay, are they tracking alongside to your property? Are they going across through your property? If they are doing some of that, then it's worth noting. And if it's definitely going across the property, then that property is a no-goer. So you need to understand what type of easement is there. Sometimes non-existence of an easement is an issue as well. So you might not have a sewer, instead septic tanks installed in a property. So always look at both sides of the coin. Yeah, it's not so much about, oh, my property does not have any easement, that's great. Well, where's the sewer? Are you sure that there is sewer available in this pocket or in this suburb, or are there septic tanks installed in these suburbs? Or where's the legal point of discharge? That's a big question when you're doing property development. So it's the both sides that you have to be very careful of. Okay. The third one is the covenants. Okay, covenants is the most tricky ones. There are a lot of restrictive covenants, and I'm doing a whole new live on restrictive covenants and what are they and how can we go about navigating some of these. But it's important to note that restrictive covenants are set up by the developers most of the time who has developed the suburb, the house, or the street for the first time. Okay, they are set up to restrict the buyer to certain things. It's like selling in a particular way, or fence or height restrictions, or frontages, or backyard limitations, or subdivision limitations. These have nothing to do with council, by the way. Okay, they are the most challenging ones, and it's very, very important that you look through them very, very carefully. They are also hidden on your title documents, and most of the times they're really old documents, difficult to read, difficult to find. And this is where majority of the times the boo-boo happens, because even the conveyancers would just skim through some of these things. So there could be covenants for single dwellings, so you can't build more than one house on it, fence size. So it's almost impossible to remove covenants. And again, wait and watch out for that full live that I'm going to do about restrictive covenants and what are they, and how do you go about navigating some of these. The other one are power lines. So the next in line, power lines or high tension wires. Stay away from them, guys. At least 600-meter in the radius. And when I say radius, I mean direct line of sight. At least 600 bare minimum is what you should be away from. The further you are away, the better you are. I tend to stay away from the suburbs where these power lines are, or not so much the suburb, but at least a few streets away from where these power lines are, because they are unpleasant to look at. If they are close, they cause a lot of health issues, a lot of health risks. People tend to avoid buying around them. So 600 meters to a kilometer, at least stay away from them when you're buying in those suburbs. Okay. um, Shape of the land. So when it comes to shape of the land, deciding what can be done with the land is quite the key. Okay, so stay away from weird shapes. Always understand what the building envelope allows you to do when you're understanding the shape of the land, and it's quite the key as well. It goes hand in hand with size of the land. So the size of the land is basically proportional to the location and the position of the land. For example, okay, a corner block, a smaller corner block is better than a slightly larger middle block. Okay, again, both of them are directly linked to frontages. They are directly linked to offsets and setbacks. So understanding the building envelope is quite the key. Basically that's the point that I'm trying to make. You make a small mistake and a 3-unit site converts into a 2-unit site. you make a small mistake and you've bought a dud that you shouldn't have paid price for. So it's quite important and quite key that the land shape, size, frontage, is looked at it in totality and not just in isolation. Okay. Offset and setbacks. So I've talked about offset and setbacks. These are minimum area required by the council to leave either at the front or on the side or at the back. This defines the building envelope of the property. A building envelope basically means the area where you can actually build. Okay. It's the gross floor area where you can actually build in the future or aiming to build when you're especially subdividing. The building envelope is the key to subdivision. Now, the position of the property. The position of the property is quite a key, or the position of the property on the land and on the street is quite the key. Yeah. So whether it's a corner block or the T intersection, is it on a major road? Is it on a crossing? Is it close to a light pole? Is there a lot of trees on the nature strip? All of these things matter, but it also matters where the property is positioned. Is it at the front where the property is built? Is it fully at the front, fully at the back? Is it in the middle? Is there any side entrance? It's quite important to look at some of these things because that adds to the value from a futuristic perspective. For example, if there is 3 meter side entrance in Melbourne, you can make it into a Battlex project, or a 4 meter side entrance in Adelaide, and you can create a Battlex there. So it's all of this is very, very important. How much space do you have in the back? It of course defines a Battlex project, but I'm just telling, in bigger scheme of things, these are quite the key things that you should be looking at. Frontage. When you're talking about the frontage of the property, the frontage of the property would define what the future use of the property is. Again, it goes hand in hand with side access. It goes hand in hand with the size, the shape of the land, the proximity, or the where the land is located on the street. All of that is very important with the frontage as well. Okay. One of the most important ones is slopes and contours. Okay. And people tend to generally stay away from slopes and contours, and it's 100% right, because a slope on a small land can be a very, very costly exercise. Okay. It can cost towards the side cut and the retaining walls. A land where retaining walls have already been done means that the land is ready for future use. Okay. But if there are no retaining walls done and there is massive slope, then it could cause you an arm and a leg, to basically build on this in the future. Okay, so smaller blocks, under 500 squares, it could cost all the way up to 40-50K just in side cost, in managing these contours, or the type of the build that would be required to build in there. The next in line is the precedence. Okay, the precedence in an area is quite the key. But again, they should be checked in together with the plan of subdivision that was originally put in place when the property was originally subdivided. Majority of the times people make this mistake and they do not look for the precedence in the plan of subdivision. They think, oh, look at this back property and it's been subdivided into three, or look at this front property, it's been subdivided into two. Well, if it's in different plan of subdivision, it does not really matter, because it does really matter if it's in a different plan of subdivision, because every plan of subdivision has different rules attached to it. So it's quite the key. um, one of the major things that people tend to avoid completely or never think about it is what sort of council activities are happening in the area. Is it any developments? Is it any extensions? Any plans for rejuvenation? I keep saying this word wrong. Or expansions or new schools. It's quite the key. Yeah? The council activities are very, very important. You need to understand how the councils are moving, what are the council's plans are for a particular suburb. And then lastly, and more importantly, the configurations of the house. When you talk about investors properties, it's a very non-emotional buy. You look at the floor plan and you understand the floor plan. What you want is a floor plan to be great. You want a great house character, you want a decent house size, but you are not so much worried about the modernization or the house age. If the house has good structural in place, if it's a good floor plan, you can play with the house. Good, great. If it's at the right price, if it's adding decent yield, then you're not emotionally attached to whether it has stone bench tops or not, or whether it has high ceilings, or all of these things. You can bypass some of these things, because ultimately, when you're talking about investment properties, it's all about where you can add value. It's not so much about the lifestyle choices of stone bench tops, or a picture perfect backyard, or amazing showers, and yeah, so all of this needs to be discounted when you're talking about investment properties. Okay, so this is the fun time. This is the questions time. I'm going to take a pause here. um, any questions so far, please feel free to jump into the comments, drop into the comments, highlight as many questions as you have. I'm happy to answer those. I'm happy to take those questions as well. What I'll also be doing is I'll be transferring some of these questions on to our Facebook group so I can answer there, so that it can benefit for everyone. Apologies, we have to limit the people that were coming into this webinar. We were overbooked at the start. We had about 250 people registered on the webinar. We thought we should only share this rich knowledge to people who are actually going to use it in their life. Thank you for listening to me. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye and stay safe.